So in this video, we're going to do a basic introduction of the cover letter and resume, what's also known as the resume package, and then also some basic interviewing tips and techniques. So with the resume package, that includes both the cover letter and resume. There's two different documents. Your cover letter essentially is going to explain and answer the question as why this person should hire you. Now, typically, a hiring manager takes about 30 seconds to read and kind of evaluate a resume package, which is not very much time, to be honest. So you need to make sure that you are addressing a specific person. Please, 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 please do not use "to whom it may concern." That's very generalized and very impersonal. Obviously, there's someone that you are going to be addressing this letter to. If you don't know that person by name, then you can use "Dear Hiring Manager" or "Dear Human Resources Director." Okay, that's more personable than just saying "to whom it may concern." Okay, you also want to make your cover letter a little bit personal. Now, you don't want to be casual, but you want to make it personable. So if, for example, somebody referred you to this job, then you might want to include that name in that cover letter. So-and-so told me that this job was available and thought I would be a great fit, and so I am submitting an application and my resume for consideration. Okay, making it personable in that regard. You also might acknowledge, if the company was recently in the news for something positive, you might acknowledge the fact that you know this and that's a reason why you want to come work for that organization. Using industry terminology is important because it shows that you already have a basic vocabulary and it gives you some credibility. I actually use this point oftentimes when I am writing a letter of concern, or if I'm writing a letter to a manager about an experience that I had. I try to use industry terminology so they understand that I do have some credibility, that I'm not just an average guest that is complaining just to complain. And so using that industry terminology gives you that credibility. If you are using templates, of which there are thousands of resume templates and cover letter templates, do not make it so generalized and very common that the HR manager is going to be reading the same thing over and over again. Okay, so an example that I had in about 2 years ago in my professionalism class, I was reviewing cover letters and resumes, and I saw this one statement that's something about like a career-driven student in blah 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 industry, and I thought, wow, the first time I read that, that's a very good sentence. And then I read it a second time on somebody else's resume cover letter, and then throughout the class of 15 people, I read that exact sentence word for word 7 times. So over half the time, I read the exact same sentence. If you're going to use a sentence like that, you better hope that you're number 1 instead of number 15 or 20 at the time they've read that. By the time they've read that same sentence 15 to 20 times, then it just looks lazy on your part. So if you are going to use a statement like that, or something that is going to help kind of guide your thought process, you want to make sure that it's still personable to you. Okay, and then also, if you're using templates and there's an area that you are not going to use, make sure you delete it. So another perfect example is I had students that were using a template from Word, and in that it included links to all the different social media: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Well, they didn't link any of their accounts to their resume. And so if I see that as an HR hiring manager, if you're giving me a link, but then there's actually no link there, that tells me that you just used a template and you didn't really take the time to personalize it. So again, that gives an impression of laziness. Okay, and so we want to make sure that everything looks professional. On your resume, okay, with your resume, of course, you want to include your contact information. That should be at the very top of your resume. You want to make it as easy as possible for this person to contact you about setting up an interview. Okay. The three things that you definitely want to have is your professional experience, your education, any special skills and honors that you've received. Okay. Now, some people have extensive experience. Some people have little to no experience as far as professional experience. But by the time you graduate from St. Philip's College, you all will have education. So you'll definitely want to hit on that. Any kind of certifications that you've received is also part of your education. And so as a result of that, they can get a kind of a picture of who you are. They're making an initial impression of who you are, okay? And so things that are the most important that you want to highlight should be towards the top. So if you don't have a lot of experience, you might list your education first. If you have quite a bit of experience, you want to list those specific jobs that pertain to the job that you're applying for. And that way they can see how your skills can align to what you're applying for. So a perfect example that you should have multiple resumes, or that it's okay to have multiple resumes, is when I first moved home to San Antonio and I first went back to school, a really good friend of mine's very high up with the YMCA, and she told me, David, give me your resume and I will forward it to who needs to get it in San Antonio so we can get you a job with the YMCA. So I had worked at a camp for a little bit, and she's like, I want to make sure that you are well taken care of and I'll forward it to them. So wonderful. This is great. This is awesome. I'm like 20, in my early 20s, and I'm thinking, wow, this is cool. I'm going to get a job with the YMCA. Well, then what happened is she called me and she said, David, I know you, but if I didn't know you and I read your resume, my first thought would be, what does this young man want to do with his life? Because my resume was all over the place. I thought that I was supposed to include every single job that I'd ever had. And so that's when I learned that you need to tailor your resume to the job that you're applying for. So you want to make sure that everything within that resume shows that hiring manager why you are the best candidate for that job. Okay. Under special skills and honors, you might want to include, if you are, if you're just out of high school, then you might want to include that. But if you've been graduated from high school for, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, it's probably not as important to list that you were student council president in high school. Okay, so you want to make sure that it is relevant. Any kind of specific skills like word processing, Excel, all those types of things are good things to include under your special skills section. One thing I do want to talk about is that objective statement. So sometimes in a template, you'll see that objective statement at the top. Unless your objective statement is very incredibly specific, your objective has already been addressed in your cover letter, or it should already be addressed in your cover letter. And so if you're trying to conserve space on your resume, because ultimately you don't want to be more than 2 pages, 1 page ideally for like about every 10 years of work experience is kind of the general rule of thumb. But you can eliminate that objective statement and save space because you're going to address that in your cover letter. You want to look at the job description and the job posting and identify keywords within both of those documents. By doing so, if you include those keywords throughout your resume and cover letter, if the company is using any kind of digital screening process, then the program will pick up on those keywords and you'll have a better chance of getting through that initial firewall of the digital screening process. So use those keywords, but you have to make sure that you use them to where they make sense. You can't just randomly put them throughout the different places, okay? And then especially avoid spelling errors. You're going to review your resume multiple times. You should also have other people review your resume, because oftentimes we see things, and I know if I'm writing something, I know that there's a specific word in a sentence, but my mind, if I just type it and I've forgotten a word in a sentence like the word the or the word a or something, my mind is going to put that word in that sentence because as I'm reading it. So giving it to somebody else with a fresh perspective is very helpful. I had one hiring manager that I've spoken to, and she said she allows 2 spelling errors. 3 strikes, they're out. And so essentially, if you can't have that attention to detail in this setting where you have all this time in the world to create this perfect document, then how are you going to pay attention to details when you're in the fast-paced working environment? So it's very crucial that you avoid those spelling errors. Now with interviewing, there's a before, during, and after. So before, we want to prepare. Okay, you might want to practice with your friends and family. There's plenty of practice questions out there. You also want to prepare your professional appearance. So even if you're going to go get a job at McDonald's as a cashier or someone who's cooking the burgers or whatever, you still want to have a professional appearance. And so there's nothing wrong with going to an interview in a shirt and tie for the gentleman, or a very nice blouse and a skirt, or an appropriate dress, or a suit for women. So take time to be prepared and prepare your professional appearance. Okay. You also want to prepare and make sure you know exactly how much time it's going to take you to get to that job interview, particularly if it's a place in town that you've never been to. Like if it's a downtown area, there's a lot of one-way streets. There's parking is an issue. So all these things are things you want to have planned out before the interview actually even takes place. Now, during the interview, if you bring a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen to take notes, you might have to jot something down. And it always is a good thing to ask questions at the end of the interview. If they ask you, do you have any questions for us, which more chances than not, they are going to ask that question. And if you say no, then it just shows that you didn't necessarily prepare. You can say you've answered all of the questions that I had initially, or one of the best questions to ask after an interview is, what is the process moving forward? And so that way they'll be able to give you an idea of, when can I expect a call about this? When are you going to make a decision? All these different things are things you can ask to show that you're genuinely interested in the process. If you bring additional copies of your resume, you might also bring references during it. Chances are they're going to have their own resume packets, their own interview packets together, which should include your resume. But if not, then you might bring a few extra copies just in case. And then after, you want to follow up. So if it's been a week or so since you've heard from them, if they said in the interview that they should know by the end of the week, and it's been a week and a half, it's okay to either shoot them an email if you have their email address, give them a call personally, just to say, I'm just checking in, following up to see if everything is going okay, if you need any more information from me, if a decision has been made. It's okay to follow up. You should also do a handwritten thank you note or a thank you card. I cannot tell you the difference that it makes when you have a handwritten thank you card. I personally will deliver them the day after the interview. Okay, so 24 hours after. You can also put them in the mail if you would like to. But me personally, I prefer to hand deliver them the day after. You don't want to take them with you to the interview because you might want to make those thank you cards more personalized. So if that interviewer asked you a very specific question, you might even be able to follow up. So I had a recent example about a year and a half ago. I interviewed for a job and I didn't quite have an answer in the interview, or I didn't feel like I had an adequate answer in the interview. And so then as a result, in my thank you card, I was able to address that question more thoughtfully. And so you want to be able to write those handwritten thank you cards and deliver those or have them mailed, because it does make a huge difference to thank someone for their time and their input.